One of the best ways to train parkour is by going abroad, going to new cities, jumping at new spots with your mates. I think that's what a parkour trip is. It's not just the sport itself. Obviously, with the country in lockdown, that hasn't been possible, and that's hard, and I think the whole community's really felt that. Through travel stories like the one I'll share in a moment, I've met some incredible people, some really close friends that I'll stay in contact with for a long, long time. The global parkour family feels so close, and the kindness that you're shown on these sorts of trips just never ceases to amaze me. It always feels like a funny thing that the one thing that ties us together is the love of jumping on walls. Such a childish but such a beautiful thing. Normally, I think a parkour trip tends to be 3 or 4 days or a week, maybe most. I think for me, a parkour trip has a bit of a sweet spot at 3 or 4 days. After that, the sleeping rough can start getting a bit tiresome. But yeah, this was a bit of a bigger ordeal, I suppose. It was 32 days in total, so considerably bigger than the usual sort of week-long trip. So we flew from London to Reykjavik, spent 3 days there before flying to Toronto. From Toronto, we flew to Vancouver, and then from Vancouver down to Seattle. Then we were sort of here, there, and everywhere from Seattle. That was sort of our base. We went down to Portland, we went to Missoula, I think back to Portland again, and then from there basically worked our way down the coast to San Francisco. And from there we came home. Unlike a normal holiday where you might search for the perfect hotel or B&B, we basically just bought a ticket and trusted in the community, really. This kept our route really open, meaning we had no restrictions and ended up basically wherever we wanted to. I think this is kind of representative of the sport itself. It's fluid, changeable, and essentially revolves around community. We flew from London to Reykjavik and then hitchhiked into the city.
We turned up and I think probably had slightly underestimated the weather. But we'd spent our first night essentially just sleeping in a bush in Iceland, right next to a church. I remember my toes just needed an hour in a shopping mall the next morning just to sort of thaw out again. Then the following day had made it out to like a gymnastics session just outside of Reykjavik. We'd met a guy there and said where we'd spent the night before, and he said, "Oh, come and at least sort of stay in my garden. I'll pop a tent up in my garden for you guys." And he at the time lived with his girlfriend Thorndis. And Thorndis was starting to get the tent out and stuff, and they were sort of halfway through building this tent, and then they were like, "Actually, let's just put you in the garage." So they had this massive like fold down mattress that just like plonked in the middle of this garage, and me and Finn were there like after having spent the last night like just freezing, we're then sitting on this like huge like king size mattress in a warm garage. And then the following night, they said, "Actually, do you want to come in the house?" We'd like had meals with them, and they'd taken us out one evening to find the Northern Lights, and we'd sat in this tiny little, like a man-made pond. Basically, you sit on the rim, and your feet are in the water, and the water's really warm, and the Northern Lights are there, and it was just like unbelievable. And as I said at the beginning, it's it's a parkour trip, and we met at like a gym, but essentially it's nothing to do with parkour. That's just like human kindness, and I think parkour trips are so special for that reason, that you just find yourself in these situations when you're with people you've never met, and I don't know if it's too bold to say, but I think there's a sort of inherent trust between people that are somewhat in the community, and I don't know exactly why that is. So we went to Toronto. There was a girl who attended the jam that we went to called Cassandra. We ended up staying at her house for 3 or 4 nights, maybe. A really nice little place. We'd cooked together, we'd watched films together, drank whiskey together, stretched together, just sort of spent the four days, or certainly the 4 evenings, just like hanging out, having a good time. But yeah, I think it's that stuff like that. It's like very quickly become quite comfortable with people who you've never met before. We then went from Toronto to Vancouver. We stayed at Origins Parkour with Renee, who runs it, and Josh Dowie was there, and Lucas. Became very, very good friends with all of them. And then after Vancouver, went to Seattle. And in advance, we'd reached out to a guy called Dustin. We basically asked Dustin if we might be able to stay at his house for a little while, and he said yeah. So I've put a little bookmark in my diary here. The flight itself was long but comfortable, and afterwards we took the 45-minute light link to Dustin's house. I think I must have eaten something that didn't agree with me, because I had to stop off in a Portaloo not 20 meters from the house. But he told us that basically everyone in the house trains. So there was 4 of them living in this huge house. Everyone trained, everyone like cooking these like big meals. Dustin showed us where we were going to spend the time we were there. There was foam rollers, there was those like acupuncture mats, there was everything we needed to just sort of like chill out after a day's training. And yeah, and we ended up being there for so long actually. Like as I was saying, we sort of used Seattle as a base. I think we spent like a good like 4 or 5 days there. Yeah, met like a good portion of the Seattle community, trained with them, and then jumped in the van with them to Portland. Then we did a trip from there. Again, we went with Cordelia to Missoula. And Missoula was where I met the Try Hard boys. So Try Hard are another team from Boulder in Colorado, largely. And yeah, we met them in Missoula. They were staying at the gym with us. And like is always the case, just instantly became friends with them. And since then, I think the following year, they came over to England and spent, well, however long living out our gardens and living rooms and stuff. And yeah, it's just the same sort of story. Like I'm still in contact with Alex and Elijah like pretty regularly. It's just that special like parkour friendship. And San Francisco, we met with Brian Kelly and stayed at his family home. But his parents came, drove out half an hour to meet us. They picked us up, drove us home, cooked us pancakes in the morning. Just again, two strangers. And I'll always remember the attitude that they had towards parkour athletes was the same as sort of we have within the community. They were saying people had shown Ryan such kindness and such hospitality that they felt almost obliged to do the same. I think that's another part of parkour travel, that it's nice to see the way that other people train, what parkour means to them, the challenges that might spring up to them. And part of that is dictated by culture. Part of it's dictated by the spots and what's available. But yeah, I don't know that there's really any other way to get that besides traveling or hosting people from other countries, as you get a real flavor, and it broadens the way you approach challenges afterwards. Like, gives you new ideas and new perspectives.
There's no question that this trip will stay with me for a long, long time. I'm still in contact with the majority of people that we met there. Still think back very fondly on all the memories and constantly looking forward to the next time I can hang with them. Hopefully in England, see them tearing up our local spots.